What's up, guys? Welcome back to the caves, and also welcome back to our weapon guide series. In this series, if you've never seen it before, we go over each of the weapons and talk about what they do and any kind of special things that they have access to, as well as talking about their overclocks and what they do to change the weapon, and also just going over basic tips about the weapon to see if you would like to add them to your build. For today's video, we're going to be talking about a very underrated and seemingly innocuous weapon with the Driller's Subata 120 pistol, a weapon that is probably the most basic out of all the weapons in the game, but that does not make it any less effective when put in the right hands with the right setup. So if you guys are ready, let's talk about the Subata and the types of overclocks it has access to see if it is the secondary weapon that you want to add to your build. By the way, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss another upload. So when talking about the Subata in terms of what it is capable of, there's really not too many things to mention because it is a very simple weapon on the surface. There's not too many crazy extravagant things about it. It's not a laser beam, it's not a grenade launcher, it's not a powerful shotgun, it's not some kind of handheld railgun, it's literally just a pistol. Now that might sound kind of boring and bland, but that does not make this weapon any less effective when put in the right hands. It also does not make the weapon any less valuable to the driller, as it gives him a lot of good utility. For one, it is the only weapon in the driller's entire arsenal that is hit scan. If you're unfamiliar with what that means, basically when you pull the trigger, the shot immediately hits its target and there's no travel time or wait. Whereas if you compare it to the rest of the driller's weapons, his flamethrower, his cryo cannon, and everything else, there is either travel time because the projectiles themselves are not actual bullets, or there's just no bullet or projectile and you're just spraying a solid stream of whatever element you are spitting out. This makes the Subata very useful for the driller in a lot of circumstances because as his only hit scan weapon, it is a weapon that you can reliably and comfortably use in certain situations where you need to make sure that your shots are hitting. Not only that, but it inherently does extra damage to enemy weak points, which makes it very usable in many different builds. While there's not too many things to talk about the Subata in terms of intricacies and special abilities, that simplicity it has makes it very easy to slot into many different driller builds, especially if you have the right overclock for it. So now going into the actual overclocks for the Subata, as of Season 5, the Subata has 6 overclocks with 2 clean, 1 balanced, and 3 unstable. And then next, as always, we will go through all of them and say what they do, as well as the different ways that you can utilize them. So beginning with the clean overclocks, the first one on the list is Chain Hit. And it reads very simply, any shot that hits a weak spot has a chance to ricochet into a nearby enemy. Now this clean overclock is one of the few that does not actually change any of its base inherent stats and instead just gives it an interesting ability. To be specific, any shot that hits an enemy weak spot has a 75% chance to chain to a nearby target. This essentially means that you can hit 2 targets for the price of 1 if you're really good with hitting your weak spots. Note that it can only chain to 1 additional target unless, I guess, if you were really lucky and the bounced shot were to hit another enemy's weak spot, then it might bounce another time, but I've never had that actually happen to me. But if anybody ever has had that happen to them, let me know down in the comments because you are probably the luckiest person ever. But basically, this just gives you the opportunity to randomly hit extra targets when you hit precision shots, and in turn can give you a little bit more crowd control capabilities if you really need it. A very simple overclock that does not give you any real downside at all, and a certainly very flashy one that you could use if you want to style on the bugs. Next up for clean overclocks, we have the Homebrew Powder, which reads even shorter with more damage on average, but it's quite inconsistent. So this actually functions very similar to the Bulldog Heavy Revolver's Homebrew Powder, which is very similar, albeit a little bit different. Basically what it does is it randomizes the damage value that you have with each shot. Essentially, each shot can either do 20% less damage than average or 40% more damage than average. So that's where it comes from, where they say it's a little bit inconsistent, whereas sometimes your shots will be more powerful or less powerful. As far as damage increasing overclocks go, it's pretty straightforward, albeit again, as the overclock says, inconsistent. And if you wanted to build this out for incredibly high rate of fire, that way you could take advantage of those shots that end up being incredibly strong, then that could be a way you could utilize this overclock to good effect. Outside of that, the inconsistency is a little bit too random for me personally, so I don't really use this one that much. But if you are quite lucky, you can definitely get some good damage output with this. And again, it's a clean overclock, so you aren't really losing anything if you want to put this on, other than, I guess, the random chance that your shots might get a little bit weaker. Moving over to the one balanced overclock, we have the Oversized Magazine, which reads, custom magazine that can fit a lot more ammo, but it's a bit unwieldy and takes longer to reload. This is a very simple balanced overclock that simply increases the magazine size while reducing the reload time. Specifically, it increases your magazine size by 10 and also increases your reload time by 0.5 seconds. So as far as balanced overclocks go, this one is pretty straightforward and it's similar to other ones that we've seen from many different weapons up until this point. And it's also not a terrible one to work around, as you could just take quick fire ejector in tier 3 and completely negate the negative drawbacks of the overclock. Outside of that though, if you want to turn this thing into an absolute bullet hose, you could go high capacity mags in tier 1 to just give you an insane amount of ammo with this, and then just build for raw damage with increased caliber rounds in tier 2 and high velocity rounds in tier 4 if you just want to increase the overall damage and give you a near bottomless magazine to use with this thing. All in all, a pretty safe and comfortable option that I like to run with a lot of my builds. And as far as balanced overclocks go, it's pretty simple and straightforward. And if you find yourself reloading the Subata a bit too much and you want to fix that, then this is a good option for you. Moving on to the unstable overclocks, first we have automatic fire. This one reads incredibly simple, fully automatic action. Watch out for the recoil. So this, as the name implies, just makes the gun fire fully automatic, but makes it kick incredibly hard. To be specific, it gives it the automatic fire ability, while increasing its rate of fire by 2, at the cost of plus 250% to your recoil. So this admittedly is kind of a difficult one to use, at least in my experience, because the thing kicks really hard and makes it kind of difficult to control. That being said, if you are going for just sheer volume of bullets, this thing is incredibly effective. And if you were trying to do something like proc the neurocorrosive toxic catalyst mod in tier 5, then this would probably be your best bet, just because you're just flinging around so many bullets. And if you just want to have basically a little machine pistol in your pocket, this is also a good option for you as well. Again, it is very unwieldy and can be a little bit of a struggle to use, but this can let you get a lot of burst damage out very quickly against either a group of enemies or a singular target. Ultimately, if you just like to lean on the trigger and just empty the clip at any given point in time, then this is a really good overclock option for you. If you are somebody who wants to be a little bit more mindful of their ammo consumption, however, this might not be the best choice. Next up, we have the explosive reload. And this one reads, micro explosives that explode inside hit targets when you reload. However, these fancy bullets come at the cost of total ammo and magazine capacity. So this actually functions very similar to the embedded detonators overclock for the Zhukovs that we talked about a while ago, in that it causes an explosion whenever you reload the weapon. To be specific, it gives you the explosive reload buff at the cost of minus 72 to your max ammo and minus 6 to your magazine size. So similar to the embedded detonators from the Zhukovs, this overclock follows a couple of the same similar rules. For starters, of course, the explosion triggers when you reload, and there is no actual AoE to the explosion, although it does look like there is one. It's only affecting the creature that the shot actually hit. It does increasing damage per bullet, meaning the more shots you get in before you reload, the better it is. Also similar to the embedded detonators, if you trigger a reload using Born Ready, it will not trigger the actual explosion. So you can, in essence, bank several magazines worth of bullets into a single enemy and then trigger an actual reload in order to get a much bigger explosion. So this, in my opinion, is probably the most consistent way to give you a really high amount of damage with the Subata. It allows you to actually be able to chunk down bigger targets, which the weapon naturally kind of struggles a bit, and just overall gives it a lot more punch that is very needed for something like this. Again, the driller's primaries are all basically damage over time in most cases, and having something like this, which can do a very high amount of burst damage very quickly, can be very useful. The lower ammo can be a bit difficult to get used to, but if you just build for more ammo or more magazine size, it's not really that big of a deal, especially since you're not really going to be doing actual damage with the bullets themselves instead of the actual explosives. So you really don't need to build too much for actual damage output, since the explosives are going to be doing the bulk of the carrying for you. This is probably my personal go-to for the Subata that I use more than anything else, as it is just very consistent and good for taking out very big things as well as large swarms as well. Finally, for the unstable overclocks, we have the Tranquilizer Rounds. This one reads, part bullet, part syringe. These rounds are very effective at stunning most enemies. So again, a very simple and standard overclock. Compared to other unstable ones that we have seen before, this basically just gives the Subata a much higher stun chance. Specifically, it increases your stun chance by 50% and also increases the duration of the stun by 6 seconds. This is at the cost of minus 4 to your magazine size and minus 2 to your rate of fire. So this can surprisingly also be a very good choice to run if you want something that's just able to corral and control enemies very effectively. The ability to basically just slow down or just stun lock certain enemies can be very valuable depending on the situation. If there's a problematic Praetorian or a Warden or a Stingtail that is just giving you trouble, you can essentially lock it down until somebody takes it out or you take it out. And in essence, stun in general is just very useful because there are very few things that are actually resistant to stun, if anything. And while this will not allow you to delete certain enemies, it will allow you to keep them pinned down long enough for either yourself or your allies to take out very quickly. One thing I have attempted to test but was not able to get conclusive results on is that if you run blow-through rounds with this weapon, can you in theory hit 2 different enemies and get them both stunned? I haven't necessarily been able to confirm this or not, but it might very well be possible. Even outside of that, this is still a very good overclock option to run if you want to have a little bit more harder crowd control or lean into a little bit more of a utility tool for either yourself or your allies. So as I said in the beginning, the Subata is a very simple and basic weapon to use, albeit it is still a very effective weapon to use. The fact that none of these overclocks are necessarily too wild or outrageous compared to some of the other ones that exist does not mean that it is any less valuable to the driller's arsenal. Because of the fact that it is so generic in a sense, it is very, very easy to slot into many different builds, and because of the varying degrees of overclocks that it has, you can essentially use this as a comfort secondary pick pretty much no matter what build you are running, unless you are running something specifically needing the wave cooker or the EPC, for example. It is simple, but it's also elegant and effective, and it will certainly do you very good in your builds if you do decide to pick it up. If you guys want to see another specific weapon covered, let me know down in the comments, or perhaps I have already covered it, so make sure you check out the playlist as well. Anyway, I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, please be sure to let me know by hitting those like and subscribe buttons, and consider becoming a member today as it really helps out the channel a lot. Rocket Stone Miners, I will see you in the next video.